The call came at 8:03 a.m. just as I was zipping up my suitcase. I still remember the way the ringtone echoed through my bedroom, too bright, too cheerful for the kind of news it carried. I thought it might be a last-minute text from the roommate I hadn't met yet, or maybe a delivery update for the twin XL sheets I'd ordered too late. But when I picked up and heard the clipped voice on the other end, everything in me stilled. Is this Holland Verrill? Yes. This is Judith from Averyhurst University's Financial Services. I'm calling because your tuition payment for the fall semester hasn't cleared. We usually don't make these calls, but move-in is scheduled for today and we still haven't received the funds. I sat down on the edge of my bed. There must be some mistake, I said, already reaching for my phone, with the other hand to check the banking app. It should have been transferred this week. Unfortunately, we attempted the withdrawal twice, the woman said gently, and both times the account returned a frozen funds notice. My thumb hesitated over the banking icon. I didn't want to believe it, but somewhere deep down, I already did. The app opened with a blink. I tapped into the Verrill Education Fund. Balance zero nosarios, no pending transactions, no alerts, just gone. The room tilted a little the way it does when you stand up too fast. Except I hadn't moved. I was still sitting there, hand clenched tight around the phone, eyes glued to the screen like the numbers would change if I stared hard enough. I'd waited years for this day move-in day at Averyhurst University, where I was starting the first of 4 years toward a degree in architecture. I'd been offered a partial scholarship after submitting a design portfolio built from weekends spent sketching floor plans in the attic and evenings shadowing Mr. Madsen, the retired architect who lived down the block. The rest of my tuition was supposed to come from the fund my parents had set up when I was 11. It wasn't a secret, it was a family point of pride. A fund built off the family business. A fund for me. I tried to stay calm, tried to think. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe something had glitched, or maybe the money had been moved temporarily and was coming back. But that hope didn't last long. Because if anyone had moved it, it could only have been them. I pressed Dad on my contact list, straight to voicemail. Tried again, nothing. I hesitated before tapping Mom, but I needed answers. The line rang twice before she picked up. Holland, she said, cool and even. Not surprised, not rushed, just prepared. Mom, I said, standing now, the phone pressed against my cheek. I just got a call from Averyhurst. The tuition fund is frozen. What happened? A pause. Too short to be shocked, too long to be innocent. We made a decision, she said calmly. What kind of decision, family one? She replied. We've been talking for a while about whether it really makes sense for you to go so far away, especially with how much you're needed here. I blinked. Needed here? What are you talking about? You know, the store's expanding, your father's taken on new supply contracts, and bookkeeping's become more complex. No one knows the numbers like you do. You've been handling them better than any accountant we've tried to hire. I'm not your accountant, Mom. I'm your daughter. And you are the future of Verrill & Sons Hardware, she said sharply. We didn't raise you to abandon the family when it gets inconvenient. I sat back down, stunned. This isn't abandoning, I said slowly. It's one semester. It's college. My dream. We said we supported you. She interrupted, but not blindly. You applied behind our backs. You never even gave the in-state schools a chance. You made your choice, Holland. So we made ours. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because it confirmed what I'd feared for months, that this dream I'd nurtured, the one I had tried to make palatable for them with spreadsheets and part-time jobs and careful promises, had never actually been mine to hold. Don't do this, I said, my voice tight. It's already done, she said simply. You're an adult now. Time to learn about consequences. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. My fingers trembled as I stared down at the banking app, again the zero taunting me like it had been waiting. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that they hadn't told me, hadn't warned me, hadn't given me a chance to prepare. This was deliberate, strategic. They didn't just pull the rug out from under me, they cut the floor entirely and expected me to fall back into their arms like I'd never wanted anything else. But they had no idea what I'd already prepared, no idea what I already knew about their accounts, and absolutely no clue what I'd do next. By the time I pulled into the parking lot behind Verrill and Sons, my hands had stopped shaking, but only just. The morning sun reflected off the back window of the store like a spotlight. I sat in my car for a full minute before cutting the engine, staring up at the faded sign that bore our family name. 3 generations worth of pride sweat and silent expectations, all wrapped in serif font and white paint, chipped from too many New England winters. Inside, the familiar scent of motor oil and pine cleaner hit me before the door chime did. The front of the store was quiet, save for Mr. Klein flipping through PVC fittings. I gave him a nod and headed straight to the back office where I knew I'd find them both. Dad looked up from the desk, first glasses perched low on his nose. Mom stood beside the filing cabinet, her arms crossed like she'd been rehearsing this moment. "You came," she said, as if that somehow validated their ambush. "I didn't have a choice," I said. "You drained mine." Dad closed the ledger slowly. "Sit down, Holland." I didn't. "I'm not here for coffee and clarity. Just tell me why." He exchanged a look with Mom, the kind I'd seen my entire life. Unspoken agreement. Unified front. "It wasn't personal," Mom said. "It was necessary. No, it was calculated. It was a correction," she shot back. "You've been drifting further away from this family for years. Applying to Averyhurst without telling us, turning down UMass when we asked you to reconsider, because I earned the spot at Averyhurst. I applied because it mattered to me." Dad leaned forward, folding his hands. "And it matters to us that the family survives. The fund wasn't some magic ticket, it was an investment. Meant for someone who would reinvest in us." "You said it was mine," I snapped. "You literally called it my fund." "It was your opportunity," he corrected, "not your entitlement." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Every word scraped against my throat. There was something almost rehearsed in the way they spoke, like this wasn't a snap decision, this was months in the making. Mom walked over to the desk and placed a manila folder in front of me. "We're offering something better," she said as if this was a job interview. "We want you to stay, take over financial operations for the store, your spreadsheets and planning skills. We've never had anyone run numbers like you, not even your Uncle Mitch." I blinked. "You want me to stay and do your books?" "Not just that," Dad said, tapping the folder. "We'll formalize it. You'd get 25% equity over time. It's a stake in something real." Something built, I repeated. Like my future mom didn't flinch. "College will always be there. The business needs you now." I opened the folder. Sure enough, there were draft contracts, equity clauses, and a tentative role outline labeled Junior Financial Officer. "No tuition refund, no apology. This isn't a gift," I said quietly. "It's containment." "No," Dad said, "it's loyalty. This is what family does. We protect each other, build together. You're too smart to throw that away chasing pipe dreams." I looked up. "You think architecture is a pipe dream? I think Averyhurst is far from home, and you've always had 2 feet out the door," Mom replied. "This was our way of bringing you back." "You didn't bring me back," I said. "You ambushed me. You didn't even have the decency to tell me before freezing the account. You let me pack my life plan, my classes by dorm bedding, knowing full well I wasn't going anywhere." Dad's face hardened. "Because you wouldn't have listened otherwise. I would have left either way," I said, "but at least I would have known what I was up against." Mom stepped forward. "If you walk away, now, Holland, there's no second offer. You want independence, then be independent. But don't come back here looking for open arms when it doesn't work out." My hands clenched. Then I guess I better learn fast. Their silence was final. Not fury, not sadness, just resignation. As I walked out of that office, I glanced back once, not for nostalgia, but for clarity. The store hadn't changed. The shelves were still overstocked. The clock still 5 minutes slow. But the air felt heavier than I remembered. as if their version of love had always come with terms and clauses, and I'd only now read the fine print. And if loyalty meant forfeiting myself, then maybe loyalty wasn't the lesson I needed to learn. They used to say I was a natural with numbers, that I could read a spreadsheet like most kids read comics. I used to think that was a compliment. I was 15 the first time my dad tossed me the store's inventory tablet and said, "Think you can figure this out faster than Jenkins was our then part-time clerk who liked to mark everything miscellaneous." I thought it was a chance to prove I wasn't just a kid doodling floor plans on scratch paper while waiting for rides home. I cataloged all the nails washers, brackets, and socket sets in 3 days. Even sorted the supplier IDs by fulfillment speed. Dad gave me a nod like I'd fixed a leaky pipe, then went right back to arguing with a supplier on the phone. By 16, I was logging weekly orders and updating price sheets. 17, I was running our QuickBooks account and helping our accountant prep tax reports. Mom once told a neighbor I was saving them a fortune in CPA fees. She didn't say thank you, just laughed like I was a handy loophole the IRS hadn't caught yet. It became a routine. Weekends at the back desk while my friends went to football games. Summers spent on payroll when everyone else was out biking the Cape. I got no paycheck, just family contribution remarks at dinner and the occasional Starbucks card in my birthday pile. And when I asked, once half joking, whether I could get paid for all the time I'd been clocking, Dad just raised an eyebrow and said, "You want us to send you a W-2 too?" They said I was part of the business, but only when it benefited them. During supplier calls, I was the one feeding Dad live totals from the balance sheet while he spoke like he had it all in his head. When we met with the new accountant, Mom introduced me as Tom's little girl who helps with the books. I was 17, handling end-of-year closings, reconciling 5 figures in vendor credits. Tom's little girl. It didn't matter that I was the one who found the $8,000 invoicing error no one else caught, or that I built the system that flagged duplicated returns. I was never in the room when decisions were made, never at the table during quarterly meetings. But when tax season hit, or a contractor disputed a payment, or the credit line needed renewal, suddenly I was indispensable. And I swallowed it. For years. Because I thought maybe it was what loyalty looked like. Quiet effort, steady hands, doing the work before being asked, and hoping someday someone noticed. Maybe I thought they were training me, grooming me for something bigger. Maybe I believed the speeches about earning your place. But standing in that office with a contract offering me back a fraction of my own time in exchange for my future, it hit different. They didn't raise me to succeed. They raised me to serve. That realization came quietly, sometime between my second tax season and my last. It didn't shout. It just settled in. A heaviness. A wondering, would they have asked a son to help out without a paycheck? Would they have frozen his tuition and said it was a lesson they never told my cousins I was managing their invoices? Never let my name go on the order sheets. I was the girl in the back who knew how to work Excel and helped make sense of the receipts. I wasn't family in that business. I was free labor with a familiar last name. And the deeper truth, they probably didn't even see it that way. They probably thought they were doing me a favor, giving me skills, responsibility, a head start. But the first time I sat across from a contractor who looked straight past me and said, "Tell your dad we'll need net 60 on this," something cracked. I wasn't even surprised anymore. I just jotted the number and said, "He'll see it when I enter it. I handle the books." He blinked, then said, "Good girl. Not good job, not thank you, just good girl." And I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it told me exactly where I stood. They trained me for a place that never existed. They told me I was vital, but only when no one else was looking. They handed me access, but never a nameplate. And that's when the doubt started. Not about my skills, about whether I ever truly belonged to the future I was helping them build. The thing about being invisible is people forget what you see, what you know, what you still have access to. I was halfway home from the store, white-knuckling the steering wheel with rage simmering under every bone, when I realized they never revoked my login. It wasn't even buried, just sat there on my phone like always, my old Viril & Sons credentials. Same portal, same permissions. The family may have frozen me out of college, but they hadn't thought to freeze me out of their books. I pulled over at the Shell station on Route 6, sat in the parked car, and opened the business dashboard. There it was. Familiar as ever. 3 checking accounts, 1 savings, credit line, vendor queue, payroll drafts scheduled for tomorrow morning, Thursday. My stomach turned not with guilt, but with clarity. The kind that only comes when everything clicks. Thursday was their light day. Inventory restocks and building materials had been processed Monday through Wednesday. Bulk invoices weren't due until the following week. Friday was their heavy revenue day contractor pickups, weekend retail surges, the usual end-of-week cushion. If a glitch hit now, if a freeze occurred on a Thursday, it would sting. Not collapse, not permanent damage, just a full stop. Just enough to panic. To remind. I clicked into the insurance schedules. 3 auto policies, 2 equipment leases, a vendor agreement with Delray Supplies, flagged for monthly renewal due next Monday. I knew the routine. I'd built most of it. Quietly, thanklessly. I checked the legal thresholds. My access wasn't technically revoked, and while the account names were still under Viril Holdings LLC, I had authorization to conduct transfers up to a certain ceiling. The policy was loose. Loose enough to let me test boundaries. And they hadn't changed the passwords. Not one. I stared at the numbers. Not petty revenge, not sabotage, just math. They froze my tuition fund on the day I was supposed to start the life I earned. Said it was about loyalty, about sacrifice. I'd spent years giving without asking, watching others get paid, hearing my name used only when they needed a scapegoat or a stand-in. This would be a recalibration. I ran the calculations 3 times. I wouldn't touch payroll, wouldn't cancel anything. I'd just move funds. Short term. Technically still within the account family. Technically not theft, but enough to lock their cash flow for 48 hours. Enough to make them call the bank and ask why the vendor line came back declined. Then I'd be just like them, no warning. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I set my alarm for 7:15 the same time I used to get up for weekend stock checks. I showered dressed in jeans and a plain navy tee and braided my hair so I wouldn't fidget with it at the teller window. My hands still remembered the login passcodes by heart. 2-factor verification went to my backup number, the one I gave the bank manager last spring during the audit review. The bank was quiet. A mom wrangling a toddler at the ATM. A man in slacks muttering about wire fees. I stepped up to the counter, greeted Marcy, the same teller who used to slip me cinnamon mints when I came in with Dad, and asked to speak to someone in commercial services. Of course, Holland, she smiled, not blinking once. One moment, they knew me here. Not as Tom's girl, just Holland. The one who asked smart questions. The one who brought organized statements and never overdrew a cent. In the little glass office, the banker Dylan greeted me with a professional nod. Back again, just a transfer, I said, sliding the pre-filled forms across. Internal reallocation, short-term liquidity hold. I'll rebalance before next week's vendor run. He scanned the document, glanced at the account tags, and nodded. You still listed as Junior Financial Authority, I believe, so I said. System hasn't updated. He shrugged, stamped the papers, and typed into his screen. All right, it'll post by end of day. Let me know if there's a reconciliation issue. I nodded, stood, thanked him. Outside, the breeze cut through my shirt like a blade. But I didn't shiver. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about fairness anymore. It was about recognition, about balance, about finally using the knowledge I wasn't supposed to keep. They taught me how to manage risk, how to protect assets, how to build safeguards and cash flow buffers, but they never taught me how to unsee what they gave me access without credit, trust without respect, responsibility without return. They wanted a lesson in loyalty. I was about to teach them one in leverage. I thought my hands would stop shaking once I left the bank. They didn't. Even as the door clicked shut behind me and the cool air hit my face, my fingers buzzed like live wires. I slid into the driver's seat and stared down at them, resting against the steering wheel. Still trembling. Still unsure if I'd done something brave or stupid. Inside that glass office, I'd sat like I'd done 100 times before. Calm. Efficient. I didn't flinch when Dylan double-checked the transfer amounts. I spoke like someone who belonged there because for years I had. And now I was simply making that belonging count. The first transfer rerouted $74,000 from the operating account into a protected subfund under the Verrill Holdings umbrella. Internal, not external. Completely traceable. Just not immediately accessible, the second transfer shifted another $51,000 into a short-term compliance hold justified as a tax prep buffer, the kind I used to set up during high-risk quarters. That left exactly $241,777 in the operating account. And then came the real move. I added a dual signature lock on any fund release over $1,000. Standard protocol. It just happened that both signatories now had to physically appear at the bank together. I also updated the alert contact on the accounts to my phone number. Not hidden, just redirected. A flag to make sure I saw the moment they noticed. It would all trigger tomorrow. Vendors auto-drafted on Friday mornings. Payroll at 9:00 a.m. Insurance premiums swept at noon. The account wouldn't go negative, not immediately, but it would stall. Hard. And someone would have to explain why. I pulled out of the lot, turned onto Monroe Avenue, and kept driving. Not home. Not back to my apartment where the rent was now suddenly due without any tuition cushion to back me up. I headed east toward a complex just past the library red brick second floor walk-up unit 2104, Shelby's place. Shelby opened the door wearing her usual Friday uniform gym shorts, oversized band tee, and a half-eaten granola bar. "You look like you just committed arson," she said. I tried to smile. Failed. She stepped aside, let me in. The familiar scent of sandalwood candles and drugstore coffee hit me like a blanket. Safe, messy, lived in. Her cat Beans blinked at me from the windowsill and flicked his tail, unimpressed. "Tell me," she said, collapsing onto the couch. What the hell happened? I sat on the floor, legs crossed back to the coffee table. The words came slow, clipped. I told her about the frozen tuition, about the call from my mom, about the family decision that stripped away 4 years of plans. And then about the bank, the transfers, the locks, the number blinking on the screen that morning, 2:41.77. Shelby didn't interrupt. Just nodded slowly like watching someone dismantle a bomb. When I finished, she exhaled. "Okay, so, you froze your parents' business to match what they did to your future." "I didn't freeze it," I said quietly. "I paused it, nudged it, legally. You leveraged it?" I nodded. "Yeah," we sat in silence for a beat. Then Shelby asked the thing I hadn't let myself consider. "Do they know it was you?" "Not yet. How long until they do?" I stared at the floor. "Tomorrow. Maybe noon. Are you scared?" "Yes." I was scared. Scared that I'd gone too far, that I'd be disowned in a way that counted, that they'd find some way to spin this into betrayal, into proving I wasn't loyal, wasn't family. Scared that I'd wake up tomorrow with a bank notification and a restraining order. But also, no. Not scared the way I was when my mom's voice turned cold over the phone. Not scared the way I'd been that morning when I stared at my zeroed-out balance and felt my entire future shrink to a parking lot full of broken boxes. "No," I said finally, "I'm done being scared." Shelby leaned forward, rested a hand over mine. "Then stay here tonight. No calls, no checking your phone every 5 minutes. Just let them find out on their own, like you had to." I nodded, the lump in my throat suddenly sharp and real. She handed me a glass of water and her backup toothbrush. Beans jumped down and curled against my hip like it was nothing. I pulled a throw blanket over my legs, and stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours. My pulse slowed. My breath evened out. Tomorrow would come, so would the consequences. But tonight, for the first time in years, I wasn't running their numbers. I was rewriting my own. My phone started vibrating at 6:07 a.m., not buzzing, vibrating like it was about to walk itself off the nightstand. I didn't even reach for it. Just stared at the cracked ceiling in Shelby's guest room and waited for it to stop. When it didn't, Shelby pushed the door open with her toothbrush in her mouth and eyebrows raised. "Did someone die?" she asked. "No," I said. But something sure did. By the time I picked it up, I had 12 missed calls. 6 from Mom, 3 from Dad, 1 from our front desk line, and 2 from Malin's personal number. I didn't open any voicemails. I didn't need to. The texts made everything clear. "Malin, what the hell did you do?" Malin again. Payroll bounced. "We have people in tears." Holland. "Malin, you think this is funny? You think punishing the whole team makes you smart, ya mom. Call me. Now. Dad." Unbelievable. Absolutely immature. And then there was the voice message. It wasn't from family. It was from Lynette. Lynette had been with Verrill and Sons since before I was born. She'd held me the first time Mom brought me to the shop as a baby, had taught me how to work the receipt printer and tally vendor invoices by hand before I ever learned QuickBooks. She called me Bug long after I was too old for it. I hesitated before hitting play. Her voice cracked almost immediately. "Holland's sweetheart. I don't know what's happening. Tom and Melissa are saying there's a technical error, but people are scared. Half the Friday checks bounced and vendors are backing out of deliveries. This isn't like you. If you're angry, I get it. I do. But please don't let the ones who showed up for you pay the price." I dropped the phone face down on the couch cushion. Across the room, Shelby poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to me. "So, that went about how you expected," I nodded. "Probably better, honestly." We sat in silence while the sun rose in slats across the living room wall. Outside, a trash truck clanged through the alley. Someone's dog barked endlessly at nothing. And inside, my phone blinked on the cushion, demanding a response I wasn't ready to give. Dad's name lit up the screen next. I let it ring, then again. The third time I answered. I don't know why. Maybe because Lynette's voice still echoed in my ears. Maybe because I wanted to hear exactly how bad it was. "Holland." His voice was clipped breath short. "You have 10 seconds to explain yourself before I start calling the bank, the police, and the damn news." I sipped my coffee. "You accessed protected financial systems," he snapped. "You jeopardized people's livelihoods. You embarrassed this family." Embarrassed, I cut in. "No, Dad. You did that when you emptied my tuition fund and called it a lesson in loyalty. That money was never a blank check for you to run off and chase some ego-driven fantasy. It was family money. It was a college fund," I said. "For me. Set aside since I was 10. But it turns out loyalty's only a two-way street when you're driving the truck." I heard him exhale hard through his nose. "You want to talk loyalty? How about the years we spent building that store from nothing? The nights you stayed up doing the books who taught you how to do that, who gave you access trust?" And here it was. The twist in his voice. The wounded pride dressed up as principle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said the words that had been lodged in my throat since Thursday afternoon. "I learned from you," I said. "Every number I moved, every policy I triggered, every line of access I learned from you. Silence. No breathing. No blustering. Just that open space between what they thought I was and what I'd become." "You want to talk betrayal," I added quietly. "You should have considered that before using my future as a threat." The line went dead. Shelby looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, I am." I stood, walked over to the window, and opened it wide. The air was still cool for late summer, tinged with dew and mulch and morning bread from the bakery downstairs. Behind me, my phone pinged again. This time, it was an alert from the bank activity freeze confirmed, dual signature enforcement in effect. Vendor drafts declined. Payroll rerun attempt rejected. I didn't look back. They'd find a way to blame me. They'd paint it as sabotage, immaturity, some tantrum from a spoiled girl who didn't want to work for her keep. They'd call meetings, draft statements, maybe even try to sue. But they'd never admit the truth, that I played the game by their rules, then beat them at it. I picked up the coffee mug and took another sip. Outside, the day was unfolding like nothing had changed, but inside I had. And this time, I wasn't answering calls. I was watching, listening, and letting the fallout teach them what loyalty really costs. By Sunday night, the adrenaline had worn off, and all that was left was static, like my brain was tuned to the wrong frequency. I sat cross-legged on Shelby's air mattress, scrolling mindlessly through old architecture blogs I used to love, trying not to check my phone. But the calls kept coming. The first one I answered was from Theo, our delivery driver. He sounded hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should be calling me at all. "Hey, Holland. I know you're probably swamped and I don't want to make anything worse, but my last check bounced. I've got a tank to fill and a route tomorrow. Just wondering if you knew when things might clear." He wasn't angry, just confused. Tired. I told him the truth. "I don't know." The second call was from Camilla, one of the newer part-timers who stocked inventory. Her voice was small. "I'm sorry to bother you. I have rent due tomorrow and the leasing office said my payment didn't go through." "I thought maybe there was a mistake. Mr. Verrill said you were working on it." I froze. "They told you I was fixing it." "Yeah, he said it was just some system glitch and you were helping sort it out." I wanted to scream, but all I said was, "I'll see what I can do." And then came the kicker, a voicemail I didn't expect. An unknown number. I played it twice before it sunk in. "This is Naomi Reyes from the State Labor Office, following up on a flagged discrepancy report filed regarding payroll interruption at Verrill & Sons Hardware. Please contact our office no later than Tuesday. This is a preliminary investigation into potential wage violations under Section 26B. I sat very still. Shelby walked in with a blanket over her shoulders. "You okay?" "There's an HR audit starting. Someone reported them." "Wait, what?" "You think they'll come after you?" "I don't know. Maybe." And that's when it hit me, the part no one tells you about righteous anger. When it fades, guilt slides in like fog, heavy, slow, blinding. I hadn't meant to hurt Camilla, or Theo, or Lynette. I wasn't trying to collapse the store. I just wanted my parents to hear me, to finally see me not as their back office ghost, but as someone whose life had value outside of ledger sheets and loyalty tests. I wrapped my arms around my knees. My stomach turned. "They're going to blame me. They already do," Shelby said gently. "But that doesn't mean they're right. I used real leverage. I calculated impact windows, scheduled the hold on a Thursday for a reason. But I didn't think..." I trailed off. I didn't think about the ripple. Shelby sat beside me. "You're not a villain, Holland. You're someone who's been cornered for years, and when people finally snap back, it's messy. That doesn't make it wrong, it makes it human." I wanted to believe her, but Camilla's voice kept looping in my head. "Rent due tomorrow." I opened my laptop and stared at the old accounting spreadsheet I still had copied to my drive. Not for sabotage, just habit. I'd memorized half the vendor codes by now. There had to be a way to reroute things to ease the worst of the fallout without caving completely. Maybe a partial release of funds, a one-time temporary exception for staff under $1,200 gross. But even as I started running the numbers, another text popped up. "Dad, if you think you're coming back from this, think again. We'll press charges." That was it. No greeting, no question, just a sentence that landed like a steel door slamming shut. I stared at it, then at the screen full of formulas and figures. For years, I'd been the invisible buffer between chaos and collapse, and now I wasn't sure whether stepping away had unleashed the chaos or just revealed it. I closed the laptop, not out of fear, but because I finally understood something. I hadn't caused the crisis. I'd only interrupted the illusion that they were ever managing without me. The message came late Sunday night after the state HR call, after Theo's bounce notice, after I'd spent hours trying not to hate myself. My dad didn't write it. My mom did. Mom, we want to talk, not yell. Will you meet us tomorrow? I stared at the screen. No threats, no lectures. Just that. I typed back before I could talk myself out of it. ME Library Reading Deck, noon, public, 45 minutes. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which somehow made my stomach turn more than if she'd sent a list of demands. The next day, I got there early. The library's outdoor reading deck sat on the edge of a slope shaded by dogwoods. There were benches, picnic tables, even a little coffee cart on Mondays. I picked a table by the far rail with the sun behind me and my back to the building. I wanted to see them coming. They arrived together, walking in step like they always had when presenting a united front. Dad wore his gray fleece half-zip, the one he put on, whenever he wanted to look calm but commanding. Mom had sunglasses in her hair and a look like she'd rehearsed something on the drive over. Oh, I didn't stand up. Thanks for meeting us, Mom said, settling into the seat across from me. Dad stayed standing for a beat longer, then slowly sat, arms crossed. I'm not here to apologize, I said. Dad's eyebrows shot up. But I'm not here to blow things up either, I added. Mom folded her hands on the table. Then let's talk. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, nothing dramatic, just bullet points typed and printed. I slid it across the table. Silence. Dad picked up the list and skimmed it like it insulted him. Is this some kind of ultimatum? No, I said, it's a boundary. There's a difference. You already drained our operating budget, I froze it, and I left just enough to cover a basic week. You had backup funds. You just never thought I'd use what I knew. He opened his mouth, but Mom cut in. Holland, we were trying to teach you resilience. No, you were trying to keep me in the family orbit. There's a difference. Dad leaned forward, voice sharp. We offered you a real opportunity. Ownership, a future, a cage with a paycheck, I shot back. You didn't want me to have dreams. You wanted me to make yours sustainable. You're twisting things. No, I'm seeing them clearly. Mom took off her sunglasses and set them down slowly. Her voice softened. It's not that we don't believe in you, honey. We just know how hard it is out there. We thought we were keeping you safe. I laughed once quietly. By freezing my future, she looked down. It wasn't meant to feel like a betrayal. It was one. Another silence stretched across the table. Dad looked like he was chewing glass. You don't do this to people you trust, I added. You don't pull their funding the day they move. You don't call that loyalty. You don't call that love. Mom's voice cracked. You used our business as leverage. I met her eyes. I learned that from you. That did it. Her composure fractured. She blinked too hard, too fast. You were never supposed to be collateral damage, Holland. Then don't treat me like I'm expendable. Dad stood suddenly, pushing back from the bench. This is what college is teaching you. How to tear down your family in public. I stood too slow and calm. No, this is what survival taught me. You raised a daughter who could run the books. But you forgot she could also run the numbers on her worth. He stared at me like he didn't recognize what he'd built. Mom reached for the paper again. Her hands shook. I'll talk to the bank tomorrow, she said, barely above a whisper. You'll have the funds by Friday. Dad's jaw locked, but he said nothing. I nodded once. Then this ends clean. I walked away before either of them could say more. The sun hit the top of my shoulders as I crossed the sidewalk. For the first time in years, I didn't turn back. I didn't flinch. I didn't second-guess the echo of my own footsteps. I just kept walking into the version of myself they never planned for. It started with a clipboard. 2 men in navy windbreakers showed up at Verrill & Sons on Tuesday morning, flashing state badges and asking for access to employee files and payroll logs. Malin called Holland from the office bathroom in a whisper voice brittle with panic. They're in Dad's office right now, she said. They asked about missed pay periods and whether we're withholding overtime. What the hell did you do? Holland sat on Shelby's couch, staring out the window as rain pelted the glass. Her phone buzzed with a Yelp alert, another one-star review this time, from a longtime customer claiming shady bookkeeping and poor treatment of workers. Then a second one popped up, saying the store felt tense and hollow since the real girl who kept things running left. "I didn't write that," Holland muttered to no one, setting the phone face down. But the rumor mill was in full swing now, and in a town like theirs, perception traveled faster than facts. By Wednesday, she couldn't go a full hour without a text or call. Some were from past vendors asking if Verrill & Sons was folding. Others were from customers defending the family. One even offered Holland freelance bookkeeping work, half joking. "You clearly know how to shake a system," but not all of it was noise. Malin texted, "You need to come home. Now." Holland hesitated, then packed her laptop, pulled on her raincoat, and drove across town through gray sheets of drizzle. When she stepped inside the store, the air felt different. Not just tense vacant, empty in a way that had nothing to do with product stock. Her parents were nowhere in sight. A few regulars browsed quietly, deliberately, not looking at her. Malin was at the front counter tapping furiously at the POS system. "Hey," Holland said. Malin didn't look up. "He's in the back. You have 10 minutes before Mom shows up. I'm not here to cause—" "No," Malin snapped, eyes flashing. "You already did that." The back office was dim and cluttered, exactly how Holland remembered it, forms, tacked to corkboards, sticky notes, curling with age, a half-empty bag of almonds on the desk. Elise, her youngest sister, sat in the side chair, arms folded, scowl set hard across her face. "Really," Elise said as Holland entered, "you couldn't just talk to them like a normal person." "I did talk to them," Holland replied calmly. "They made a decision. I made one too." Elise stood, voice rising. "No, you torched your own family. You humiliated them in front of the entire town. I didn't post the Yelp reviews. I didn't start the inspections. You're the reason they came." Holland exhaled, tired and steady. "No. I'm the reason the books got flagged, because they weren't clean. You just never looked." Malin entered then, arms crossed, eyes darker than Holland had ever seen. "You always had to be the clever one. Couldn't just let go. Couldn't just take the offer and stay." Holland's throat tightened. "You mean the offer to give up everything I've worked for in exchange for part ownership in a failing store?" "It's not failing," Elise hissed. "It is, if the only way to keep it alive is controlling your kids like assets," Holland said. Malin stepped closer. "You used the one thing you knew would hurt them." "No, I used the one thing I was taught. Leverage, strategy, planning. Don't blame me for playing the game better." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was heavy, like all three of them were standing in the eye of a storm they'd thought would pass. "You think you're better than us now?" Elise said, quieter. "Because you're leaving?" "No," Holland whispered. "But I do think I deserve to leave. I gave them years of free labor, my weekends, my summers, my trust. And when I asked for one thing, my tuition, they pulled the rug. They called it a lesson in loyalty." Malin's jaw clenched. "I didn't choose betrayal," Holland finished. "I chose a future. You chose comfort. And that's fine, but don't ask me to drown in the same silence that kept you here." Elise didn't reply. Malin looked down, then away. The clock on the wall ticked twice before either moved. Holland backed out of the office, heart pounding but breath steady. As she passed the register again, a teen employee, Sam, she thought his name, was nodded once in her direction, the kind of nod that meant more than words. She nodded back. Outside, the rain had slowed, but puddles still dotted the parking lot. She stepped over one, keys in hand, and didn't look back. Not this time. The damage was done. But so was the denial. I used to think being quiet was the same as being agreeable. As a kid, I learned early that loud voices earned frowns in the Verrill household. Questions made my father sigh. Suggestions made my mother's mouth tighten. So I stopped asking. I started nodding. I learned how to be useful, not opinionated, helpful, not heard. I was 8 the first time I said I wanted to be an architect. I'd watched a home renovation show on PBS and spent the next 2 hours sketching redesigns of our kitchen with my little Crayola markers. I showed the paper to my mom while she was sorting coupons at the table. She barely glanced at it. That's cute, honey, but architecture isn't a real job. That's a rich person's hobby. I remember blinking, but the show said, the people on TV, she said flatly, have trust funds. We have grit. She smiled when she said that like grit was better than any blueprint. That Christmas, I got a pink toy cash register and a calculator with glitter buttons. I knew not to say I'd asked Santa for building blocks. By the time I was 12, I could run a receipt roll, reset a router, and troubleshoot QuickBooks. At 15, I was reconciling expense reports. My parents called it real-world education. They'd brag at Church Holland's so mature. She's not like other teenagers, she's part of the team. But it was never a team. It was a loop. I got praise when I made their lives easier. I got ignored when I mentioned scholarships, summer programs, out-of-state universities. One time, I said I wanted to apply to the architecture boot camp at Northwestern. My dad didn't even look up from his invoice stack. He just said, that's cute, but who's going to run payroll while you're off building sandcastles? At 16, I stopped dreaming out loud, and I started winning their approval instead. Quietly, steadily. I streamlined the store's back office, color-coded the vendor files, tracked late invoices with precision that made my father say, you're sharper than any bookkeeper I've ever paid. He meant it as a compliment. I took it like currency. I saved every piece of praise like pocket change. Collected it in silence, hoping someday it would be enough to buy me permission to leave. But it never was. Because the truth is, they never feared I'd fail. They feared I'd succeed without needing them. It wasn't about money, it was about obedience, about keeping me close, useful, and small. College didn't just threaten their finances. It threatened the whole dynamic they'd built, one where I was the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who didn't rebel, didn't drift, didn't leave. I see it clearly now. The tuition freeze wasn't the first betrayal, it was just the first one I couldn't excuse away. There were 1,000 smaller ones before it. Like the time I got into the state science fair and my dad told me to skip it because the shop's inventory audit couldn't run itself. Or the birthday when I asked for a drafting table and got a rolling office chair instead because you'll be in a desk job anyway. It's strange how love can feel so close to control when you grow up in it. How praise can become a leash. How you can be told you're special but only in ways that serve someone else's comfort. I used to think my parents didn't believe in me. But now I realize they believed in me just enough to keep me in orbit around them. That's not belief. That's possession. And I gave it power for years. I let the silence speak for me. Let the praise lull me into thinking I was chosen, not used. Let the routine convince me that dreams were indulgent. That security was better than self. But not anymore. Because now I know the most dangerous lies aren't the ones they told me. They're the ones I started telling myself. I didn't think the whispers would sting. Not after everything. But it's different when they come from people who once smiled at you in the produce aisle. At first I tried not to care. I told myself it would pass, that people would forget, but they didn't. They clung to the story like it was church gossip, because it came from Tom and Lisa Verrill, the couple who'd owned the hardware store on Maple since 1989. The couple who gave their daughter everything only to be repaid with corporate sabotage. That was the phrase I heard at the coffee shop, soft but not soft enough. Even people who had once congratulated me for getting into Avery Hearst Teachers, former neighbors' church friends, started acting muted. No smiles, no how's school, not even eye contact. I caught Mrs. Holbrook, my old civics teacher, walking into Macmillan's grocery as I walked out. She glanced at me, did a stiff nod, and turned away. This was the woman who once wrote in my yearbook, "Change the World, Holland. You already changed this classroom." Now she could barely meet my eyes. That night I scrolled through the store's Facebook page, something I'd avoided until now. It was full of condolences, prayers, half-truths dressed as concern, thinking of Tom and Liza as they navigate this betrayal. No one deserves this from their own flesh and blood. Another said, we raised our kids to know better. Hope she comes around. That's when it hit me. If I didn't speak, they'd keep writing the ending for me. And the town would believe it. Not because my version lacked truth, but because it lacked volume. The next morning, I brewed a single cup of coffee and sat at Shelby's table watching the steam rise like it might spell out a sign. I didn't need revenge, but I needed my name back. I didn't want to scream. I just wanted to be clear. I opened my laptop, opened a blank document, and wrote a letter. Not to my parents, to the people watching from the sidelines. The ones who weren't malicious, just misled. The ones who deserved the full story. I called it a note from Holland Verrill about what really happened. It was factual, not angry. I explained how I worked in the business since I was 15 unpaid, how I managed the store's finances, payroll, vendor tracking, and digital systems, how I was promised a tuition fund that I'd earned through scholarships, savings, and service, and how that fund was frozen without warning on the morning I was supposed to move into my dorm. I told them what my parents said, that it was a lesson in family loyalty, that I was running off to chase pipe dreams, that they wanted me to stay local, be the good daughter, and inherit the business. I admitted what I did, the transfer, the freeze, the security lock. I explained it wasn't about hurting the business. It was about forcing a conversation they refused to have, a boundary they refused to honor, a dream they refused to believe in. And then I wrote this, silence doesn't equal guilt. Sometimes it equals exhaustion. I didn't speak sooner because I thought I didn't need to defend myself. But I see now, if you don't speak your truth, someone else will sell theirs in its place. I still want Averyhurst. I still want architecture. I still believe in building things. I just no longer believe I owe my future to people who never saw it. I read it over, not once, not to revise, but to make peace with it. Then I posted it, not on my personal feed. I sent it to the Verrill County Journal, the small but widely read local paper that ran weekly profiles, election updates, and stories on the goings-on of familiar families. An hour later, the editor replied, "Thank you for this, Holland. We'll run it in the Sunday Perspective section." And just like that, my silence had an expiration date. It wasn't revenge, it was record correction. And when the paper hit front steps that weekend, folded with my name in small, bold letters across the center spread, I didn't flinch. Because I finally understood, when you grow up quiet, people mistake your absence for admission. But sometimes, silence isn't surrender. Sometimes, it's just the breath before you finally fully speak. By Monday morning, the letter had made its rounds. What started as a Sunday feature in the Verrill County Journal was now taped to break room corkboards, quietly passed across counters, and texted between neighbors like a secret worth knowing. I didn't post it on social media. I didn't need to. The town did it for me. Someone scanned the print version and uploaded it to the community Facebook group. Within hours, it had comments from people I hadn't seen in years. Most of them didn't post publicly, but my inbox, both email and physical, started to fill. The first was from Mr. Dorsey, my junior year math teacher. Known mostly for bad jokes and rigid grading curves, he'd once written me up for sketching columns in the margin of a geometry test. His email was short, "Read your letter. It was honest and overdue. You always had precision, not just with numbers, but with values. Don't let them take that from you." Then came a card. Handwritten in a careful looped script I immediately recognized as Mrs. Callahan, a longtime customer at the hardware store. She and her late husband used to special order copper fittings no one else bothered with. The envelope was addressed in green ink. Inside, she wrote, "Holland, my husband always said you were the only one in the store who ever knew where things truly were. Don't let them tell you different now. We see you. Keep going." I pressed the card to my chest before sliding it into the back of my notebook. The most surprising came on Tuesday, a voicemail from Ron Flanders, owner of Flanders Paint and Supply, technically a competitor, though the businesses hadn't really overlapped since the early 2000s. "Just wanted to say your folks gave me hell for hiring my daughter as GM last year. Said I'd regret it. Haven't yet. And after reading what you wrote, I think they were just scared you'd do the same and better. You've got guts. That's worth something." I listened to it twice, then saved it. Not everyone liked the letter. Some comments called it divisive. One woman, a friend of my mother's, wrote in a public reply, "Some family matters are better kept private. Public shame isn't a virtue." But most replies weren't about shame. They were about recognition. I hadn't blamed my parents. I hadn't called names. I had just told the truth plainly, that I was raised to be useful, not free. That every moment of training had come wrapped in a bow of obedience. That daughters are often taught to earn their keep and then reminded that independence is a betrayal. I'd written I was brought up to be grateful, not curious, not ambitious, just thankful to be included, but you can't build a future on someone else's permission. And this time, I'm not asking for it. That paragraph was shared the most. Even strangers I didn't know tagged each other under the screenshot with comments like "this" or "reminds me of Aunt Ginny's situation." The next time I walked into Macmillan's grocery, the cashier, Emily, who was a year below me in school, gave me a nod. Not just polite, meaningful. And on my way out, I passed Mrs. Holbrook again. This time she paused. "Holland," she said gently, "that piece was brave. I didn't understand before. I do now." I nodded. "Thank you." She squeezed my elbow. "Don't lose that clarity." That night, back at Shelby's apartment, I sat by the window with my laptop open, watching headlights flicker across the walls. I reread the letter again, not to check for flaws, but to remember that it was mine. Shelby came out of her room in fuzzy socks and a sleep mask propped on her head like a crown. She leaned over my shoulder and read the last paragraph aloud. "You don't get to call someone disloyal when you built their loyalty on silence." She let out a low whistle. "You really went there." "I had to," I said. "They made their statement. I made mine." She grinned. "They wanted a Verrill who knew how to handle pressure." Well, they got one. We laughed quietly in the way only two young women who'd seen too much and lost just enough could. It wasn't a win, not yet. But it was movement. And sometimes, in a town like ours, movement is the loudest kind of rebellion. The email came in just past 6 a.m., sandwiched between a campus housing update and a coupon for half-off oat milk. Subject line A, conversation if you're willing. It was from my mom. I didn't open it at first. I just stared at the notification on my phone as the sun stretched a long, pale line across Shelby's kitchen floor. Something in me didn't want to touch it, not out of anger, but out of caution. Some wounds feel fine until you walk on them. I opened it later, sitting cross-legged on the floor with coffee in one hand, and the cat Shelby was fostering sprawled across my shins. The email was short. No guilt, no spin, just, "We were wrong. If you're open to it, we'd like to talk with humility, not conditions." And at the bottom, Mom and Dad, no script. No family loyalty jargon. Just a step down. A step back. We met 2 days later on neutral ground again, this time the bakery at the edge of the industrial park. The kind of place with 5 tables and cinnamon rolls as big as your face. I chose the booth near the window, arrived 15 minutes early, and sat with my hands tucked into the sleeves of my cardigan. They walked in together. My dad looked older than I remembered, maybe from the stress, maybe from the mirror I no longer softened for him. My mom wore her hair in the low twist she always pulled it into when she wanted to appear composed. But her eyes gave her away. They didn't sit down immediately. "Is this still okay?" she asked, nodding to the seat across from me. "It's fine," I said. And I meant it. They sat. My dad spoke first. "We've taken steps. The tuition fund's been restored. Same amount plus what we'd promised for books and housing." My breath caught, but I stayed still. "We know we can't undo what we did," my mom said, "but we wanted you to have it, not as a bribe, as a correction." I nodded slowly. "And the store we've brought in a full-time accountant," my dad admitted. "Third party. Clean books, proper checks. We weren't prepared for what you knew, what you could do." That last part wasn't snide. It was something like awe. Or maybe regret. Then came the part I hadn't expected. My mom folded her hands and stared at them for a long moment. Then softly, "We thought we were protecting you from failure." But it turns out, we were protecting ourselves from losing control. The words landed like a bell. Quiet, but impossible to ignore. I said nothing for a few beats, then finally replied, "You raised me to be capable. But only inside your frame. We see that now," she said. "They didn't ask me to come back. Didn't beg for public redemption. Just sat with the truth long enough for it to stop stinging and start shifting. When we parted, it wasn't with hugs, but a nod mutual. Like a ceasefire between adults, not a truce between a child and her parents." A week later, I returned to the store just briefly. I wanted to see what they were building without me. The open sign was still crooked, and the cracked linoleum in the back hallway hadn't changed. But there was a new face behind the register, a woman in her 50s with salt-streaked hair and a professional calm. The accountant, I guessed. She looked up when I passed, gave a small smile. "You must be Holland." I blinked. "Yeah, I am. I'm Marcia," she said. "Your dad mentioned you used to do all this yourself. Impressive." I gave a half smile. "That was a different season." She nodded. "They're trying." Outside, I stood under the awning for a minute, watching a dad and daughter load mulch into a truck. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. They'd built the store, I'd run it like a grown-up, and now it was neither of ours completely, and that was okay. I stepped off the curb back into my own season, a cleaner one, a future shaped with my own hands. The studio lights at Averyhurst hummed quietly above me as I slid open the drawer of my drafting desk. It was metal-framed and scuffed from years of use, just like the dozen others lining the studio's perimeter. But this one was mine now. Mine to scratch and spill on. Mine to dream across. The whole space smelled like paper graphite and determination. Around me, other first-year architecture students were unpacking rulers, sketch pads, and mugs with cracked handles. Someone played lo-fi beats on a low speaker. Someone else had already pinned up a photo collage on the corkboard above their desk buildings, mountains' faces. I pinned up one thing, a faded Polaroid from 8th grade me, standing in front of my 4-H camp cabin with a crude little floor plan in my hand. The one with crooked windows and a roof I drew too steep. I remembered thinking back then that the problem was just the pen I used. I placed my laptop down, opened it, and video called Shelby. She answered from the apartment, hair piled in a messy bun, one earbud in, and what looked like a grilled cheese in her hand. "Well, if it isn't Miss Averyhurst," she said, grinning. "Look," I said, angling the camera to show the studio. They gave us actual keys. 2 actual desks. Shelby's smile softened. "You really did it." There was something in her voice, not surprise, but awe. Not at the school, but at the fact that I'd gotten here despite everything that tried to tell me I couldn't. I gave her the tour of the main studio space, the corner coffee station, with someone's abandoned mug already leaving a ring the supply lockers. Then I turned the camera back on me and just held it for a second. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just letting it sink in." She raised her mug in a mock toast, to measuring twice and cutting once. We hung up a few minutes later. I closed the laptop, leaned back in the drafting stool, and just listened to the room. Pens scratching, chairs sliding, someone laughing softly over a misaligned model. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. I stared at it for a beat before opening. "Your plan layout from that 4-H camp project is still hanging in the back office." No emoji, no punctuation, just those words. I sat still for a long moment, blinking faster than I wanted to. That old piece of graph paper, faded bent at the corners, coffee-stained. He'd never mentioned keeping it. I always assumed it got tossed when we reorganized inventory, but it was there, still pinned to the corkboard wall, probably above the fax machine, or wedged between a tax calendar and some outdated OSHA poster. Not a declaration, not even an apology, just a breadcrumb, a quiet recognition, and maybe that was all I needed from him. I tucked the phone away and pulled out my sketchbook, smoothing the page flat with both hands. The graphite pencil felt right light but certain. My first lines were shaky not because I didn't know what to draw, but because I finally could. No one was looking over my shoulder. No one was telling me it was a hobby or a phase, or that the family needed someone steady to hold the books. I could build here, with people who didn't know the version of me that stayed quiet to keep the peace, who'd never seen me behind the register at Verrill & Sons, who didn't call me Tom's daughter or the good girl or the helper, just Holland Verrill, student architect. I sketched a curve, then a beam, then the rough outline of an open-air community center, something I'd had in my head since middle school back when I thought architecture was just about blueprints. It wasn't. It was about space, boundaries, access, choice, all the things I'd fought for without knowing I was. My eyes blurred slightly and I blinked it away. Not sadness, just release. They'd taught me to measure twice and cut once, to be precise, to plan ahead, to avoid waste. So I did. I measured what they offered, I measured what they took, and I cut away what no longer fit. And from all that every wrong measurement, every uneven edge, I made something of my own.